3 years ago, I came to Newark, Ohio, and got roped into doing a free consulting gig, which I hear is not all that uncommon. And we were asked the question, how do you transform a small town? And specifically, how do we eliminate poverty in Newark, Ohio? And what came out of that conversation was a project called Project Main Street. And it's a place to find hope when you just think it can't be found. And the Sparta Restaurant. The Sparta Restaurant is about collaboration, it's about compassion, and it's about a community effort to transform our town, Newark, Ohio. And when I first put this talk together, it was supposed to be 18 minutes. And so I had 3 points. But what I think I want to talk to you guys today, especially as Denison students, is about the possibilities that happen when we become willing to embrace the pain of a community. Newark, Ohio, 42.3% of the working class from 18 to 65 are unemployed. 100% of the kids who go to school within a mile of the Sparta qualify for free lunches. It's a place, it's a post-industrial society that basically has been given up on, where people are in generational poverty. And you say, so what is the solution to change? The first thing, the very first thing that's important is understanding that we got to give up the old patterns of charity, of self-pity and selfishness, and begin to move towards this new model of openness and compassion. Most of the work I've done in my life up until these last 3 years, I'd have to confess, has been about charity. Although I'm a student development guy, and I'm a developmental theorist, and I believe in community development, it had never crossed my mind that very little of what I'd been engaged in, whether it was in Haiti, or whether it was in South Africa, where I was working on a doctoral dissertation on this broad theme of developing an impoverished community without, affording, social chaos, which didn't go too well in the throes of apartheid, I got to tell you the truth. All the models I was working on seemed to be closed-ended, and they were about giving and rather than responding, and very little of it had to do with the kind of relationship that has happened here. So rather than using the old models that we'd used in the past, we asked a very simple question. How do you change a small town? How do you help people that are encountering such incredible pain that they don't want to go on with their lives? And how can we as a community, people like you and I that care, how can we engage in this community in such a way that provides long-term, sustainable change? The Tao says 3 things. It says because we are compassionate, we can be courageous. It says because we are efficient or frugal, or we could use the 21st century term sustainable, then we can become magnanimous givers. And it says, and because we practice humility, which from an Eastern perspective means having an accurate understanding of who we are, then we can exert leadership. But the very first step is the most important one. We've got to move away from self-pity. The old model says we develop a program and we lay it on top of a city, right? You're familiar with that. We come in, whether it's Habitat for Humanity, or whether it's a food closet, or whether it's some other program for social change, and we say, here's a model that works, now make it work in your community. We turned it on its head, though, because I didn't think I knew anything, first of all, about community development. But what came clear to me within a little period of time was this, is that if you're willing to encounter the pain of a community, if you're willing to build relationship, and if you're willing to stay in it for the long haul to make a difference, and if you understand that it's not some sort of a hierarchy, but it's all of us working together, then you got a shot. You got a shot at social change. And that's what the Sparta came from. So there's this philosophy called a third place. The third place philosophy says your first place is your home, your second place is your job, your third place is that place that you hang out. And my assumption was that in small towns that you don't need that, right? You heard Mac talk about it earlier, about how this digital generation has lost its ability to connect. Well, in a small community that's depressed, there's no place to go. So we thought, what if we did this outside the box? About rather than saying, let's do this program, we said, let's create a place where people can get the job training that they need, because there are 3 things that are part of Project Main Street. It's about job development and creation and training. Okay, that's all 3 in 1. But then the second part is about poverty alleviation, and the third part is about community development. And here's the little tidbit that has changed my life. Communities grow and change just like people grow and change, right? Not that profound, because communities are made up of people. So number 1, are we willing to let go of the self-pity which blocks us from awakening? Now, if you are familiar with the recovery movement, then you're familiar with what it means to become honest, open, and willing. But if you study developmental theory, you also know that the challenge that's faced for the American college student in developing and forming identity has three prongs that feed into it. The first is learning how to manage emotions. The second is developing competencies. The third is developing autonomy. And then once identity is formed in this great experience called Denison University, you guys walk out of here, and if I asked you, and I do it all the time, if I asked you the question, if you could do anything that you wanted to do with your life, what would you do? Most of you could at least give me some sort of an answer. I mean, come on, you probably was partly proud of your entrance exams to get in here. You have to have some sort of a great thing. This is what I'm going to do with my life when I leave Denison University. It's also how you'll get into grad school. It's the same answer. But when we ask the at-risk kids in our community, kids who have 1 and 2 credits as juniors and seniors, if you could do anything that you wanted to do with your life, what would you do? They had no idea what we were talking about. And so we realized that the traditional form of education, of saying, here's your curriculum, come and be a student, engage, and then go and be transformed, right? Doesn't work for people that are in poverty. What they need is a long, consistent experience that's filled with the kind of openness and opportunities that I took for granted for most of my life. So when we asked these kids if you could do anything that you wanted to do, they didn't know. The first thing we realized we had to do is I said, I got to chum the room with people that'll ask these questions that'll be part of this conversation. So I came to Denison, and I grabbed a bunch of you guys, and I said, come to the Sparta on Friday mornings. What's the Sparta? I had no idea how really to describe what this was in the beginning. We just knew it was this fluid model of how social change takes place. And out of it, this open model of building relationships and collaboration and everybody having a seat at the table. And rather than telling people what they needed, we asked them what they needed, what they wanted. And we gave them a voice, and we gave them the ability to take charge of their own destiny. And we coupled them up with people that cared. And we took away the hierarchy that said, I know what you need, I'm smarter than you, I'm wealthier than you. And even though nobody ever verbalized that, that's exactly what you feel like when you're in poverty every single day of your life. When you go to the social service line, when you walk into a restaurant, when you walk into a place where you're buying your groceries and you pull out your SNAP card, you know what it's like to feel less than. So we said, turn it on its head. Let's give them a seat at the table. Losing the self-pity. This is what this model looks like. This is not give a man a fish. You've heard that, right? It's not give a man a fish. This isn't teach a man to fish. This is sitting on the banks with folks and fishing. And out of this relationship has come 3 different prongs. The first is job training, development, creating businesses. The second is food, where Denison graduates are working with us this year in a 160-acre farm. But rather than approaching the model of how can we make the most money, we said, what would it take to feed the 7,000 hungry kids that are in Licking County right now today? How much food would we need to grow to feed every one of these kids so that none of them are hungry? And we built a job program out of it and a business description out of it. And right now, Shane Richmond and Leah Crosby are working on a 160-acre farm and raising the money as we speak to make a difference in this community. But a year ago, they were sitting where you are when we asked the same question. How do you want to participate in this vision of making a difference? Moving out of self-pity, moving out of the selfishness, moving out of the delusion, moving away from our inability to embrace the kind of pain that you find is repulsive, and instead engaging in the openness, in the collaboration, in the community spirit, in this creative model that is exciting and will scare the shit out of you all at the same time. It's unbelievable. Every day you never know what's going to happen. When the reporters were talking to us about this early on, they said, what are you doing? And my people would go, oh, it's magic, it's magic, it's magic. So by the time she got to me, she said, how would you describe this program? And you can't say magic. And I went, well, I guess if it was a movie, it would be Cheers meets One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Because you never know on a moment-by-moment basis what's going to happen inside the rooms. But the magic of what happens here is unlike anything I've ever experienced. Because we are compassionate, we can be courageous. Because we are frugal or sustainable or efficient, then we can become the kind of magnanimous givers that make a difference. You guys have heard about the triple bottom line, right? People, product, and the planet. Well, there's 2 more P's that go with that, and it's purpose and passion. So now today, a year after the fact, when we ask our people, if you could do anything that you want to do with your life, what would you do? You know what they're doing? They're repeating some of the things that you guys have told them that they can do. They built relationships with people that have resources in our community, that believe in them. And we ask this question: what if we treated the people facing these barriers or obstacles as the experts, as the people who might know what they need and not tell them what they need? And what's happened as a result of this is that the human dignity of the human spirit has been amplified. And folks are starting to feel hope all over again. Because we're compassionate, we can be courageous. There's a young guy who works with me right here. His name is Bus. This cat here on the screen was the biggest drug dealer in our community. And you think, how am I going to employ 13,000 people in our community that need these jobs? How are we going to feed 7,000 kids? Well, there's this theory that we work off called the pebble in the pond. And basically what it says is that we look to find either a prototype, a beta principle, a pilot program, or an individual that we can invest ourselves into that will make the biggest splash or ripples that we can inside the pond of Newark, Ohio. Damaris is one of these guys. He spent his entire life making thousands of dollars. He was the biggest thug in our community. He came to us after being out of prison for 2 years. Oh, and by the way, the guy in the first slide that you saw, his name is Kevin Scott. And Kevin will tell you that a degree from Cornell in business and the best education that the country can offer doesn't mean a thing if you got a felony. Because if you end up with an addiction in life as great as Denison's been for you, then McDonald's won't hire you after you get out of the joint, no matter how smart you are. So sometimes it's just wrong place, wrong time. Sometimes it's the wrong obstacle. There's all sorts of reasons why it doesn't work. But Damaris has this jacket, and it's the most beautiful, god-awful, ugly thing you've ever seen. And half of it is this hand-stitched picture and sayings of Dr. King, right? So it's all about peace and being the change we seek. And the other half of it are the quotes from Malcolm X. And, it's like, how does that go together, right? Well, if you're in poverty, you know exactly what that means. For a guy like him, it's about possibility. It's about peace. It's about that balance between the Rumi Rambo factor that we talk about sometimes it's about going 100 miles an hour, and other times it's about backing off and being a part of. Here's what we know. 21st century communities have to be sustainable. Small towns need an opportunity for change. If we become compassionate in our approach, then we're going to see the courageous acts that transforms communities. If we can engage in sustainable behavior, then we've got the opportunity to meet the needs that seem overwhelming. And then finally, I love that last line of the Tao. It says, the translation is because we know who we are, then we can become leaders. And that's how small towns change. Thank you very much.